All right, let's get started with session 6. Go ahead and take your seats. So for our moderator for this session, we have Liam O'Rourke, and Liam is the wastewater surveillance and waterborne disease epidemiologist with New Hampshire's Department of Health and Human Services Infection Disease Surveillance Section and has held this position for 2 years. Liam has a bachelor's of science majoring in environmental health and safety from the University of Illinois and a master's of public health with a focus on epidemiology from Benedictine University. Prior to his work with the state of New Hampshire, Liam worked as a health risk assessor with Tennessee Department of Health and was a water quality specialist with Tri-County in Colorado. Thank you very much, Liam.
All right. Hello and thank you. Welcome to our panelist hour and 15 minutes. Our panelists will each have 5 to 7 minutes each on what we have learned about planning for response of sampling and testing, thoughts and future perspectives. After each speaker is given their brief presentation, they will then be asked to sit in these lovely chairs where questions will be taken. Our first speaker is Dr. Amanda Feldpausch. Dr. Feldpausch started her career in public health over 15 years ago as a Peace Corps volunteer prior to earning an MPH at Emory University. She joined the Georgia Department of Public Health as a CDC CSTE Applied Epidemiology Fellow and subsequently served as the zoonotic and vector-borne disease epidemiologist and Zika epidemiology lead for DPH. After over 10 years with DPH and earning a doctor of veterinary medicine from the University of Georgia, she now serves as the One Health Epidemiology Director, where she oversees the Respiratory Disease Epidemiology Unit, National Wastewater Surveillance System Team, and other One Health activities. Amanda Feldpausch, Georgia, with the Georgia Department of Health. Please welcome. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. So yeah, thank you all for having us here today, of course. I wanted to talk a little bit about our Georgia National Wastewater Surveillance System because I think it reflects on what I'm going to talk about our thoughts on how we view sampling design, how we view testing, and how we view our advancement of this in Georgia and how we can use this. I know a lot of other states, Ariel, especially we have a lot of similarities in North Carolina. We're also a decentralized state. But we all deal with some of the same challenges in building these systems and building confidence and support for them. So I think, again, just kind of talking about this in detail will help to build that foundation for what we're discussing today. So one of the things we always reflect on is our different scales of wastewater surveillance. So there is the national level. I know you all have talked about this. Wastewater Scan, we have really close relationships with them. Dr. Wolf is with us here in Georgia, but we work with them very closely, and we like to use those partnerships to supplement and to help us in this type of thought process of how we do sampling design and also how we do testing and how we, again, use the system to support those things. There's obviously Verily Life Sciences, BioBot, and then CDC News and other CDC teams and programs. We also utilize those. I know a couple people have asked questions that work with the Warren team and also Sharp and others. And we utilize all of those relationships and collaborations when we're thinking about how we do sampling and how we respond and do testing in Georgia. We also then, of course, have our state and local level, which is our Georgia only program. And we also work with universities and academic partners. So I'll talk a little bit more again about collaborations, but we try to leverage opportunities to think about how we're going to look at sampling, how we're going to look at testing. One of the groups we work with is the Center for Outbreak Analytics, CFA at CDC, but we have partnerships with one of those sites in Georgia, SIDMath at Emory. And we have made sure to work with them to make sure that wastewater is a big part of that as we advance forward. And again, that leverages those relationships and helps us to respond in situations without necessarily having to do a lot of changes to our state-led program. And then, of course, Georgia News. And that's our symbol that our communications department came up with. So just to give a brief timeline for us in Georgia, we were awarded funding in August of 2021. I always like to note this because I know states receive funding at different times throughout this process. And I think that helps to give context to how sampling was built, because we were really fortunate to receive it after a lot of other states had programs even prior to some of the COVID funding that was available. But then also some of the other states had received funding prior to us, and we were able to learn from that. One of the first collaborations we had was with other states, talking to them about their programs and really trying to use that and utilize that in building the foundation for ours. We had sampling begin in April of 2022. I think we all have, there's a photo that we have of our first sample we received, and I think we all have it printed out and, on our desks. But the second year of the program, we began testing, and we actually leveraged early on testing support from our academic partners at Emory. They helped to train our laboratory. One of the things that also, again, plays into when we think about changing sampling design or think about response is to think about and remember the lead up that it took to build this program, the front end push that it takes to have the expertise to change sampling, to change testing, to add targets. Those things aren't just magic that just happens immediately. You have to build that capacity. And so early on, we spent the first 3 or 4 months of our program was our lab working with our academic partners at Emory. They had capacity, they had institutional knowledge for wastewater testing. They trained our laboratorians. They helped us to determine what equipment we needed, what assays, things like that, so that we could transition this program to our lab in August of 2022. Since then, we have celebrated years of wastewater sampling and testing, and we can continue to evolve this and to think about our sampling strategies, to think about, when impacts happen, how can we respond in these situations? When, things came out about polio, about H5N1, how do we fit that into our news program that we've built this foundation of? What is our responsiveness in this, and what does wastewater play a role as? So wastewater-based epidemiology in Georgia, I also wanted to touch on this because, again, when we think about how we're going to look at our sampling design, our testing designs, we want to keep this in the forefront that all of these things need to happen with anything we're doing with wastewater in Georgia. So planning and logistics, we'll talk a little bit about a few of these, but wastewater treatment facility retention and outreach is a huge one I'm going to talk about. And that really plays into how we think about what we might do with sampling design or what we might do with testing in the future. Cross-disciplinary partnerships. I know others have talked about this in previous panels, but it is so important to think about how wastewater is a really unique science, and it's innovative, and it's when we get these data, we need people who know how to understand wastewater data, but they don't also need to be experts at flu or experts at norovirus or whatever it is, and we lean on our subject matter experts for that. So we are a cross-disciplinary team, and this is one of the reasons in Georgia why we have this sitting in One Health, is because that is one of our most cross-cutting teams. There's a research and learning component. And again, when we're thinking about sampling design and we're thinking about testing in the future, that research and learning is really important. And it doesn't always have to be us at the state that's doing that. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that with our partnerships. Communication and then program evaluation and expansion is really important to us. And again, all these things lay the foundation for us to be able to be nimble and to respond in situations where we need wastewater to be a tool in our tool belt. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide, but a lot of people have talked about this, but it just gives an idea of what we do in Georgia. So we test at the wastewater treatment facility level, which I know a lot of states do. We actually work with them to get collaboration with compliance sampling. So we have folks at the wastewater treatment facilities who are already collecting compliance samples. They collect a sample for us as well. We provide the shippers and the labels, and they send it off to us, to our lab. And we try to make it as less burdensome as possible for them, excuse me. And we really want to show our value of those partnerships, because they're doing this with us as partners, but they aren't receiving, a lot of their value from it themselves as far as monetary or otherwise. They're really doing it out of the goodness of their heart and to contribute to this body of science. So, we continue to want to tell them how much we appreciate them. We have facilities that send 2 samples a week, and then our lab tests those, and then we disseminate results to our partners from there. So data dissemination, really important to us. And we want to think about this when we're thinking about sampling strategies. Can we put these data together in a way that we can disseminate to folks that's meaningful and that informs public health action? That's going to be always really important to us. So sampling design change, just really briefly to talk about what we consider when we think about responsive sampling design is frequency. So we need samples. People have talked about twice a week, once a week, different types of frequency, but we still need them repeatedly. We need samples over time. We need to look at trends. We need data that we can compare, that we can look at how those levels change over time. And so we need sustainability with it. Number of locations, we have to think about equity. We're a decentralized state. Atlanta is very different from outside of Atlanta. Everybody knows that. Personnel and liability, when we think about people collecting these samples, right now we're working with wastewater treatment facilities. And so what we're really thinking about is, as opposed to sampling design change, how can we work with partners to sustain this network and community to support wastewater surveillance needs in the future? And how can we respond within the network that we have built and that we continue to invest in? So wastewater treatment retention and outreach, we look to WEF for a lot of stuff, for support and opportunities. And again, we prioritize our wastewater treatment facilities. We have a recruitment strategy that's based on health equity, and we work with our local health departments also to support that. And again, we work with our partners like Wastewater Scan for that research component. So for our goals, again, we want to increase those collaborations. We want to work within our internal team, and we want to continue program expansion, but we want to do that while thinking about this foundation that we've built and maintaining those partnerships. So thank you for the time, and I'm sure we'll talk more later.
Thank you, Dr. Feldpausch. Our next speaker is Dr. Marc Johnson. Dr. Marc Johnson received his PhD from Oregon State University in molecular and cellular biology, specializing in aquatic viruses. He then went on to a postdoctoral fellowship at Cornell University, specializing in retroviruses. He started his own lab at the University of Missouri in 2005, focusing primarily on HIV replication. In 2020, he was recruited, along with Chung Ho Lin, to stand up a wastewater surveillance system for the state of Missouri with the Missouri Department of Health and Senior Services and the Missouri Department of Natural Resources. Welcome, Dr. Marc Johnson.
Thank you. So this will be a little different. I want to talk to you a little bit about the future of what wastewater surveillance could be and kind of think big picture about it. Here are my take homes. With wastewater, we can find things we weren't looking for. And if we really want to, we can figure out where those signals are coming from. You've already heard about Missouri. We've got a very broad network. We started in late 2020 to do sequencing of wastewater. This is the first place where we started finding unexpected things. So we used a different approach than anyone else. There was no system at the time where rather than sequence the genome, we target places, areas of it where we maintain linkage information, which is really good at finding the needle in the haystack, things that are rare. This is really fast, cost-effective, less than $50 a sample, and you get great depth. We still use this today. I've had a lot of data about it. About 2 months into our process, or 3 months, in March of 2021, we got our first big surprise from a sewer shed from St. Louis, where we started seeing week after week from only one sewer shed a lineage that just did not match anything that had ever been seen in a patient. Drove me crazy. And we named these cryptic lineages, which are unique evolutionarily advanced SARS-CoV-2 lineages detected in wastewater from an unknown source. And at the time, I came around to thinking, this has to be coming from an animal reservoir. Why else would it not move around? So we wanted to figure out what possible animal sources were, which is where we picked up my favorite assay, which is where we amplify a piece of ribosomal RNA, and then we deep sequence it, and we find out all of the vertebrates that are pooping in that water. And we have applied that a lot, and so we went back to our sewer sheds with cryptic lineages. By the way, we found a bunch of these in New York City, and Rose found a nice juicy one in California as well. And indeed, first sewer shed, yeah, there was a lot of rat, and I was convinced this was coming from rats. But then we went to another sewer shed, no rats. There's a few other things like dogs, cats that were potential candidates, but it didn't know the source. But then the great breakthrough came when Martin sent me a sample from Wisconsin. He sent me a bunch, but one of them stood out. It had this nice, juicy very diverse cryptic lineage in it, and it was very consistent. We picked it up every month in 2022. And we decided we needed to figure out which animal this was. Now remember, we thought we were looking for an animal reservoir. So we started from the main treatment plant and we just started following up the line, doing a lot of sequencing, figuring out which source had the cryptic lineage in it. Went through a lot of manholes before we got to the last one, which was the source. And I'll tell you two things about first of all, this was the highest level of SARS-CoV-2 from wastewater that I have ever seen. I think Martin would agree. It was logarithmically higher than anything I'd ever seen before. What we learned at that point, and this is kind of where we stopped, is, oh, there's nothing contributing to this wastewater except for humans. This is a person we know from the lineage that this is a person that had been infected for several years and was shedding an insane amount of viral material in wastewater. But the other take home, more relevant, is uh, you can find the signal. This was not technically hard. I do not encourage you to take this lightly. We have not done this again since, but it can be done. If there's something you need to find, it can be done. So now I want to talk about what you can do in the future. What are the possibilities? So starting in December last year, we have this collaboration where we are doing metagenomics on the entire virome every week. So what we do is we filter to remove all the bacteria, and then we peg precipitate to separate the things that look like a virus, and then we do metagenomic sequencing, shooting for 1 billion reads a week. About 2/3 of what we pull out is ribosomes, which drove me nuts at first because they have similar biophysical properties to viruses. But then I'm like, that's actually kind of cool because we have this really detailed readout of the microbiome without having all that DNA crap. It's pretty can be fun to play with. But of that, it's mostly bacteriophages, which have no matches in the genome, which drive me nuts. But about 6% are known viruses. Again, mostly bacteriophages and plants. But about 0.01% is indeed mammalian viruses. But when you're doing 1 billion reads a week, that's still 100,000 reads, which can tell you a lot about what is there. So what do we see? Well, this is the coronaviruses, SARS-CoV-2. The number of reads we saw of SARS-CoV-2 would be a few thousand per sample, which it pretty much matched what we were seeing by every other metric. Was high in the winter, and then we've seen a late summer uptick, just like everyone has been seeing. We also saw all 4 of the other human coronaviruses, but they did not show the late summer uptick. They've stayed flat. Some other interesting ones, human parainfluenza virus 3 had a nice spike in the beginning of the summer. Contacted the local health lab and they confirmed, yeah, we've seen a lot of those in our biofire results. That is indeed what's happening. And here's why I was asking about Hep A. We had a nice Hep A outbreak. I have no idea whether this is one person. They were not detected, but it fortunately only lasted about a month and then it went back to baseline. So now finally, some surprises. One thing we kept consistently pulling out from the sewer shed was introvirus G, which I hope none of you have ever heard of before. It only infects pigs. I'm like, where the hell is this coming from? And so I did a little research, and there was really only one source that I could think of in that sewer shed. There was a research facility, and so I was, hey guys, can I have some of your pig poop? We think your pigs might have a virus, and they're like, yeah, sure. It'd be interesting to know. And so we got some pig poop. We just got this result actually last week. Their poop is crawling with enterovirus G. Almost certainly was the source of it. But it's again an example. I didn't have to go fishing up a sewer shed to find this. You can find the source of these weird things sometimes. It doesn't have to be a big scare. Finally, influenza. Influenza A went up in the winter, January, February, peaked and went back down as you would expect. Flu B, we also were detecting, peaked a little later, kind of normal. Here's one thing I was not expecting. Influenza C. How many of you even heard of flu C? There's, okay, you're a virologist. It was not at all on my radar, but we consistently saw more flu C than A and B, but I can't confirm whether this is real because it's not even on any of the respiratory panels. It's generally mild, but it still surprised me. And finally, the big surprise, and this is my soapbox here, is that this is H5N1. We started detecting it in March. We were not looking for it, but we had 6 months of never seeing it, and then suddenly it's up. It stuck out like a sore thumb. This is like the last place you'd expect to find H5 because there's no infected cattle known in this state. But we figured out that it probably was milk from a different state that went to a dairy that was in this sewer shed. But if you didn't know, H5, the transition to milk probably occurred about November, December. We missed it for about 6 months. If one had been doing this kind of surveillance, we would have caught it earlier. Totally could have caught it and saved the industry probably billions of dollars. And here are my take homes.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. Up next is Dr. Helen Nguyen. Dr. Helen Nguyen is Ivan Rechef Endowed Professor of Environmental Engineering at University of Illinois. Dr. Nguyen is the recipient of the AEESP CH2M Hill Outstanding Dissertation Award, NSF Career Award, ASCE EWB Sustainable Development Award, and University of Illinois College of Engineering Dean's Award for Research Excellence. University of Illinois Award for Excellence in Advising undergraduate students. She was also awarded a Fulbright Fellowship to Israel and 2 visiting fellowships from the Japanese Society for the Promotion of Science. She is currently a co-editor-in-chief for Environmental International and editor-in-chief of GeoHealth. She leads a research group focusing on pathogen transmissions and control. Her research has been featured on Washington Post and New York Times. Welcome, Dr. Nguyen.
Hi, everyone. I'm really glad to be here and very grateful to learn a lot about you, about your work. So our team of civil engineers from University of Illinois, University of Florida, and University of Alabama in Birmingham. And very important, we have also have a partner at Nature, which is organizations that support local and public health department. So this is a project that funded through by EPA. And because of that funding, we don't try to do the response like most of you are doing, but we have time to do the research and look at sampling in places that without centralized sewers. As you know, most of the work that we have been doing, across the country as wastewater treatment plant. Very impressive work and very important. However, 1 in 5 households in the US is not served by centralized sewer. They are served by septic tanks, right? Septic systems. So 1 in 5, that is 20% of households in the US, millions of people. So how do we do? How can we conduct surveillance for those populations? The answer is actually, you can do it at schools, right? Because everyone sent kids to schools. So that we came up with very early. However, the challenge, what we found is the resource that public health department in those places can do. So our partner at Nature connect us with a number of very small local and public health. And by small, I mean the whole department have single digits personnel, fewer than 10 people. So when we started to talk to them, they said like, yeah, this is really cool, but we are not big city. We're not Chicago's. We cannot, implement things and, analyze them. What can you do for us, right? So then we are like, okay, let's think about it. That's not one challenge. Another challenge here is 3/4 of us for family vacation, we drive instead of flying. And if you have to transit like a place like O'Hare, which I have to do all the time, it delay all the time. It just delay, right? So if you have a family, and limited time, we drive. So we have I-95, I-57, I-74, I-74, pretty much go everywhere, right? Okay, so one of our colleagues in this team is a transportation engineers. So they can model it. They can model people travel using something called a gravity model. Okay, so and then we have our team know how to model outbreak, trigger, and transmission. So for example, what we have in here is I don't know whether this is the thing, but anyway, so this is the risk map for Illinois. So what you have up there is a little bit of a city of Chicago, right? So that is a higher risk. And then it go down to other places. For example, my town of Champaign, Urbana, right? So if we can put on top of that the transportations model, then our idea is, can we do that? Can we also look at the regional transmissions of disease, of infectious disease in this case, and we can do it at finer scales. So this was a great idea. Then we get into another challenge. How are we going to sample it? And along the highway, they are septic tank too, right? So we actually identify location along the highway, working with Illinois Department of Transportation. But then it's like, it's actually really hard to sample in the location. The manhole are smaller, that's one thing, not enough flow. Okay, because in the rest stop that we look at it, so people don't take shower at rest stops, right? So there's a lot fewer liquid. So what we can do with that? So with that two challenges, one is for the schools at the small local public health and also highway. So we spend some time to design samplings, right? So this one here, you probably see, a lot of East Coast or Hutch type of composite sampler. You need people to put it down, okay? And a lot of, so this is actually a picture that our team took at the highway rest stop. It's just too big. The manhole too small that we can put it in there. So our team actually designed, we call it a modular composite sampler that my student here, you see, so he can actually use it with one hand. He can install that. And all of the components of this device we bought from Amazon for less than $1,000. Okay, and the part that actually reduce the weight of the things is a dream battery. You can also buy it from Amazon. Okay, and the dream battery, you recharge it before we use a car battery, which is very, very heavy. So this is only about 24 inches tall and 10 inches wide, and weigh less than 5 pounds. Even easier, okay? So we actually do like the passive sampling method, okay? So we did learn it from the Georgia Tech team. However, for the highway, we actually had to design something slightly different because we did not enough liquid, right? There's a lot of fecal matter and, a lot more solid compared to liquid in those places. So we basically design, so we went to Home Depot, by like PVC pipe, have a lot of holes in that, and then we just put the membrane filter inside that hose, and then this is the hose that we tie to it. So with that, we can put it down into the manholes at the rest stops, okay, and we take it out and then we analyze it. All right, so this is my last slide in here. So we have been sampling at rural schools in Illinois. So the part that I wanted to show to you here is the data between February and March, okay, 2022. So with the city, which is a data show on above, that you see that they are very low detection or incident rate. However, with those schools in the rural places, they actually increase. Okay, my last slide in here. So inexpensive sampler and passive sampler were developed, and from community with septic systems, sampling can be conducted at K-12 schools. High-one sampling can help to monitor transmission due to human mobility. And so that is my contact information. And of course, I need to thank EPA for allowing us to have the resource and time to develop on this method. It does take time. All right. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Nguyen. Our next panelist is Stacie Reckling. Stacie Reckling is a GIS scientist working with the National Wastewater Surveillance System to use geospatial data and methods to advance wastewater-based epidemiology. She is passionate about increasing the role of GIS in public health with an emphasis on improving health equity. Stacie is also a PhD student at NC State University and previously worked as an environmental program consultant at the NC Department of Health and Human Services. In her free time, she enjoys traveling with her family and spending time outdoors gardening and tending to her chickens. welcome, as Ariel coined earlier, the GIS whiz, Stacie.
Hey, everybody. Happy to be here today to, show you some maps. As I always say, there's a map for that. Yeah, everybody in North Carolina is probably used to that by now. It's my favorite phrase rather. So yeah, I'm gonna jump right in. So I'm gonna focus mostly on geospatial data and methods that we can use to inform our responsive sampling and testing strategies. In the beginning, when we were, first setting all of this up, we're right in pandemic mode. There was a big focus on, how many people are in the sewer shed, and then how can we take that number of people and learn, what is the population that we're covering? So do we have a high enough proportion of people in the county or in the state? And maybe when we were selecting our sites, we looked at that information, but we might have layered in a little bit about vaccination rates, maybe looked a little bit at the social vulnerability of those communities to kind of assemble that group of sites that we wanted to be testing at. But I think we're moving to the next phase of wastewater surveillance a little bit, and we can start using some geographic information to inform where we're testing and sampling. There we go. Okay. So yeah, this is all based on our sewer shed polygons, which are those little blobby looking areas inside of the county boundary. And in this one, in particular, we have 6 sewer sheds in that single county. And on the last slide, you saw that it looked very gray, right? We had that one little bit of information, but using our sewer shed polygon as well as other geospatial data layers, we can add a lot more information. So on this slide, you can see we've added our proportion of the population in that sewer shed of different race and ethnicity demographics. That's portrayed in the little pie charts. And those pie charts are also symbolized by the total number of people. So getting some more information about our population. That data is coming from the US Census and American Community Survey data. And as you know, that's a quite extensive data set. So this is just like one piece that we could be looking at. We could also layer in information about educational attainment, poverty, percent unemployed, how many people have health insurance. So all of that information can be assessed in a GIS to look at that proportion of the population. Additionally, on the map, we've got social vulnerability ranking. So this is the overall social vulnerability score. Our sewer sheds are now colored by that overall ranking of the population in the sewer shed. So our map is getting a little more colorful here. We can start moving away from the gray and start having some more data to make a data-driven decision. And now let's make our map a little busier. I would never say that you should actually put this all on a map, just want you to get a sense of all of the different data that you could be using. So in this slide, we've added on the key points of interest in the sewer shed. In particular, we've got locations of airports, hospitals, as well as universities and colleges. In addition to these key points of interest, you could also look at long-term care facilities, skilled nursing facilities, other transportation hubs besides airports, and just understanding like what is happening in that sewer shed, what's contributing to that wastewater signal can help us, well, not me, but help you all decide where do you want to test? How often do you want to test in that sewer shed? And really kind of get a little bit more, I don't know, you don't want to lose the effectiveness of your program, but you could become a little bit more efficient with where you're sampling and when you're sampling. And then finally, there's been some work in some of the different sewer shed polygons around whether this site could be used as an early warning site. So we've added a little star to that center sewer shed based on a study that came out of UNC. We know that that site is a leading indicator where the wastewater was giving us that early signal over the clinical data. And then also we can look at our locations of our sewer sheds in conjunction with existing surveillance data and kind of, decide where are the sewer sheds that we could start sampling or that we need to add to our sampling that can fill in existing surveillance gaps. So we've gone from a gray map to a map with a lot more information, but this is just like a small representation of what's really out there. I feel like everything has a location and we should be leaning on that information to inform our wastewater surveillance sites. And just like a quick hypothetical example, like how could this look? It's going to be different for everybody. It's going to depend on your individual surveillance goals and the needs of your program. And it's going to change over time depending on what targets you're trying to analyze. So let's say you're in this hypothetical state and you want to first select like a core group of, say, 20, well, depending on the size of your program, 20 maybe so sites that are really representative of your either county or your statewide population. So you would have that group of 20 sites that's core. You're sampling them, once, 2 times a week, all year round for the particular targets that you're interested in. And then say something happens, something changes, and now you want to oversample your socially vulnerable populations. Well, you can start pulling information about where are sewer shed communities that have high social vulnerability scores, lower income, or perhaps no health insurance. So now you've got these different groups, they're kind of coming on board. And then you've got another change, and all of a sudden you're seeing something happening in your college-aged population. Well, again, you can go back to your geospatial data and say, where are our sewer sheds that have colleges and universities? And when they're coming back from breaks or they're in session, maybe you want to increase the amount of testing that you're doing. Maybe that means testing more frequently or adding additional sites. Again, that will be up to the programs individually to decide. So yeah, I just wanted to give a geospatial perspective on responsive sampling and testing and give you a little bit of a flavor of what's out there in my eyes that we could be leaning on to make these decisions.
Thank you, Stacie. And I would now like to welcome our speakers up to the aforementioned lovely chairs where we can start taking questions.
Hi, this is Susanna Borrell from Ohio. When I think about responsive sampling, I always feel like we need to figure out way to make to be able to onboard facilities which we may be not actively working with really fast. Do you have any thoughts or even the methods, right? If we talk about targets, how can we develop fast method? Because that's usually a responsive sampling and testing is about how fast we can implement these things. So can you give me your thoughts about that?
I can start and we can pass. One of the things, thinking about onboarding facilities really quickly, there's, we find a lot of lead up in doing that. So one of the things we're trying to do in thinking about quote unquote responsive sampling is thinking about the facilities that we're bringing on. And I mentioned briefly the health equity approach to identifying facilities, but we're thinking about representative facilities. We're trying to think about all the types of things that we might want to capture in the future and onboarding those facilities now. And so, I do think, as you said, I mean, we're not going to have everything covered. And so we do need to think about how we can rapidly onboard facilities. And some of the things we have done, our news epi team lead, Christina, is here. So if you want to talk to her afterwards as well, she's a great person to talk to. But one of the things that we have done is we have put together kind of a suite of onboarding tools. So we have videos for how to package things, videos on how to, take samples. We have all of the paperwork put together. Christina and her team does a lot of work in reaching out or talking to our wastewater facilities, even those that aren't onboarded. So getting together with our water groups in Georgia to let them know about the program, basically just making sure that that people know about it. So even if they're not participating with us, if we have a facility that we need to onboard rapidly because of an emerging health threat or something like that, they know about us at least. And so I think part of that is that communication aspect. The other thing we do is we also have facilities that will be advocates for us. We have facilities that we have that we know we could put another facility in touch with that is, somebody that they work at the same level, they have the same goals, they have the same people that they answer to. And so those facilities can do things we can't, which is talk to them about what it's like being in our program, and how burdensome it is to them, things like that. So, just kind of building that network and community, I think, is one of the things that helps us to potentially be able to onboard facilities faster. But again, we're trying to also avoid that by bringing on as many representative facilities as we can, thinking beyond our current targets and what we might want to sample for in the future.
I'll add to that a little bit. I think just having a really good relationship with the facilities that you're currently working with, having good communication with your utilities goes a really long way, because that's a small group when you think about it. They talk to each other. I had the opportunity to go down to a wastewater treatment plant in Kinston, North Carolina, and be part of their continuing education program. And while I think their eyes might have glazed over a little bit, I think they also were really excited to hear about wastewater surveillance. They're not often aware of this use of wastewater for public health, right? So just having a really good working relationship with the utilities you have can go a long way towards making partnering with new utilities a lot easier.
I had a question for Dr. Johnson. It was a very, very nice presentation. I'm curious about the 1 billion reads statement that you made. Is that total reads per number of samples? And if you could.
That was reads per sample, which is, yeah, that's a high end of what one could practically do, but the cost of sequencing has gone down a lot. That's about $1,000 per sample, and it's overkill at this point. It's finding that sweet spot.
Right. So the question is, moving forward, what do you think that sweet spot might look more like for a transcriptomic, metagenomic approach for monitoring?
I think probably one or a couple hundred reads would probably suffice, which with current sequencers could come down to a couple $100 per sample. I mean, a big part I think we need to do is if we get a better grasp on what's there, you don't need as much. But yeah, it's not necessarily something that you would want to do every site every week, but it'd be more of a network thing where I think if you did it over a certain had key sentinel sites and did it every period of time just to see, once you know what's there, you can set a baseline and you can see if there's anything new that's happening that we just isn't on our radar.
Hi, Angie Collette Salmon, CDC and H. Warren. I have a combined question for Stacie and Helen. When I'm thinking about health equity, and I really enjoy both of your talks. I'm visual, and at the same time, how do you reach the rest of the population, right, that aren't in these major city centers? So my question is, one, about the process you had to have permission to access the manholes on a highway, but then also in the future, as we want to screen to be efficient with our time, are the plumbing sewer lines, is that a public access state? I doubt, because of security issues. So I'm wondering, what is the reality or the question of combining looking at sewer lines with the mapping of different counties?
Yes, so I can start for the highway. So the highway is maintained by the Department of Transportation for certain state. So it like I-74, for example, so state of Illinois, state of Indiana. So when we, and the rest stop are owned and operated by Department of Transportation. So that is the way that we go through that. At the beginning, we also thought about gas stations, there's a very big gas station like Love, and things like that along I-74. But then, getting there is a little bit of difficult because they are also private properties. So we end up working with Department of Transportation of the states. So that is definitely possible. And definitely, it's at the beginning of the project, we also want to focus on the equity. So we went to visit a few places, like connect to us by nature, our partner at nature. And there's a village that have the mayor is not even Durban, but the mayor is also the police chief, firefighter chief, and the wastewater engineers. It's like I was very surprised. Why does it work? And then I was told that because one job is not enough. There's not enough taxpayer to pay for one position. So one person had to do like everything. So having a very extensive, careful sampling doesn't really work for those places, especially on the places that also on septic. Going through the schools is actually really nice. So we work with the local public health department, and then they connect us with the district, the school district, regional school district, and then also parents, the board, the parent, yeah, the board of the schools, and also parents. So with all of that, that allow us to get into schools.
I think another part of your question was about data availability. And I can
Yes.
definitely speak about that. So depends. Some states have publicly available, sewer pipe data, and other states have none. Some utilities are very willing to share their GIS data, and other utilities are not. So no, there is not a national data set that's going to be available for sewer features nor sewer sheds. So we're kind of at a point where we're still working on building up that data set and trying to really get sewer shed polygons, at least for the sites that we are sampling. It would be great if there was a concerted effort to, have those sewer shed polygons for every possible site that we could sample. And I think that really would be a big change for what we could do with geospatial data, particularly. But yeah, I think there's some modeling efforts going on. I think there's maybe some ways to use some remotely sensed data to get at these questions. But so far, I don't think we're at that point yet, but I hope we can get there.
Likewise. Thank you both.
There's a couple questions online. One for you, Amanda. Can you talk more about the wastewater treatment plant index?
So I think they're referring to the health equity approach. So one of the things that I think we've talked about a lot here is this resources and support for these programs and sustainability. And one of the things that we like to do in Georgia is to engage our fellows and other folks that we have that have this opportunity for doing projects to support the work that we're doing within wastewater that aren't necessarily funded, because, I know a lot of states I've talked to, they may have a couple of people who are doing wastewater epidemiology, and those persons have to do the entire job. I know Liam and I have talked about this. He does this entire job. He does the communication. He does the wastewater treatment facility onboarding and retention. He does the data analysis, and that's the same story from a lot of states. So I'm giving this background because I think it's important to this question about our index, is that we had a student that took this on. So, and to Stacie's point about using GIS data, but also there are other data sources, and they did use some geospatial data in it, which is great. But the index, we basically used publicly available data and some data that are available to us from within our own state, from our Office of Informatics, and I'm sorry, it's an acronym, OHIP. But anyway, utilize those data to look at our different health districts. So we have 18 health districts. To then look at counties within those districts, to look at population served, but not only the population numbers, but also, industries, social vulnerability indexes, different types of things that could be, again, something that we want to consider with wastewater coverage, and making sure that we are representing our persons in Georgia, our citizens in Georgia, more than just our metro areas, as many people have talked about here. So the index itself, again, combines a lot of those different data sources. Then we looked at county counties within those. In Georgia, we have 159 counties. It's the second largest number of counties of any state in the US. It's way more counties than are needed. But we did look at different counties and then prioritize. And then again, we went out to our local health departments because we are decentralized. So we went to our local district health departments of those 18 health districts and asked them what they thought about this index. Does this look to you like we are getting good representation? So we got some anecdotal information from them as well. And then we combined all of that again to prioritize sites for onboarding, not only to get good representation, but to also think about the question earlier of, you know, what are we going to be able to do in the future with these, and to make sure that we had sites that cover different Georgia industries, persons, et cetera.
Hi, this is Smitty Nepal from US EPA, and I just kind of wanted to follow up on the previous comment and Stacie's response. So we are initiating a national effort to do sewer shed mapping. This is going to take in some real data and use those as a modeling tool. This is a long-term process, so we are trying to gather information, real sewer shed polygons. Right now, there will not be any kind of sewer lines. These are more polygons to represent sewer shed mapping. And our draft final, which will start beta testing, will be out next year around end of 2025. So I just wanted to respond to that. Thank you.
Smitty,
Smitty, Nepal, I'll give you my information.
you were the modeling approach I was referring to.
Yes, okay.
Another question online. We're going to stay on the topic of mapping. So this is for you, Stacie. Have you used environmental data and built environmental data, so things like heat, rainfall, industrial land use, land cover, to help explain unexpected or anomalous behavior in wastewater concentration data and also assess sample quality? Or are those factors not impactful enough?
No, I definitely think they're impactful. I had the chance to work with a graduate student at UNC that was looking at inflow and infiltration in the sewer shed. So taking into account some of these different data sources around weather. I think all of that environmental data already exists. I don't think we would have to create anything, but we do need to start looking at ways to combine that with the sewer shed so that we can start using that information around, you know, if we have a major precipitation event in the sewer shed that's then diluting our wastewater, if we have a lot of inflow and infiltration in that particular system, then we might be able to, you know, adjust what we're seeing in the wastewater, or at least respond to it differently, even if we're not, you know, directly applying some sort of a factor to it to adjust for rainfall. We would be able to say, hey, we know that we just had 10 inches of rain in this sewer shed. And then we can say, well, maybe that's why we see nothing in it this week. And I think from the hurricane that just rolled through North Carolina, I think our data is probably going to be impacted by this maybe last week, right? It already is. Okay. So yeah, I think these are really important questions, and I hope that we can get around to answering them.
Rose Cantor from UC Berkeley. Marc and I have collaborated, so I feel comfortable pushing you on this. I'm curious what you would see as a vision for an unbiased sequencing surveillance approach at the national level that would encompass not just RNA viruses, but DNA targets as well, and how you would want to make that cost effective.
I would identify sentinel sites across the country. I would choose a regular rotation that you're going to check them at a regular clip. The DNA RNA thing, that's a technical question. It's actually not a problem. But we isolate RNA, which makes it cleaner because you don't get all of the chromosomal DNA from the bacteria. But those little DNA viruses still slip through. We get adenovirus. We get papilloma, polio. Yeah, they're still there. You can't get rid of them that easy unless you treat with DNase. But I think it's doable. I think yeah, you just have to pick your sites right and pick a cost-effective way. Just something where you have a net that can see if there's something new that's happening that's beneath the surface. Because I mean, this has been such an educational experience for me, learning what is really circulating versus what we are paying attention to. Maybe it has no meaning what's, I mean, maybe it's solely asymptomatic. We don't need to worry about it, but it bugs me that I don't know it, that we should at least know what's circulating amongst us.
Another one for you, Stacie. This is about census data. Can you speak to the fact that because census data is updated only every 10 years, does this cause an issue and would there be approaches to reducing the effect on getting accurate information?
Well, I mean, everybody knows census data is not perfect because it's only reflective of who's filling out the form, who's sending it in. So there's populations that we're probably undercounting. I think there's studies out there from the 2020 census data that Hispanic, it was like a record undercount of Hispanic populations. So, but it is also considered like a pretty fundamental data source that everybody is using. So I think it is reliable, but I think you need to recognize its limitations at the same time. As far as how often it's updated, the American Community Survey data is like a forecast based on the census data, and it's updated much more frequently. It also has a different set of variables that you can look at. So I'm actually pulling from both and from the most recent version of that. So yeah, maybe that's not the perfect answer, but it's, you know, not perfect data.
I had a follow-up question around, and folks who've worked with me know that I have strong thoughts about this, but I had a follow-up around your approach, Mark, with the last question, saying we need sentinel sites. And I guess my question is, what defines sentinel? I think there's a lot of definitions out here for what defines sentinel in different ways. And what I'm often feeling is that sentinel is almost at odds with this. It's a trade-off between sentinel and the way people are using the word sentinel for like early detection, say, and this idea of representation and health equity, right? And I think I'm just wondering your definition in this specific scenario, not overall what your thoughts are, but I also open it up to the panel and anybody here about definitions of surveillance or sentinel surveillance kind of wiggling, right, in different ways, and how that is at odds a little bit with some of the health equity and representation questions.
Well, the first thing I would do is not decide myself. I would get some smart people in the room with me and we would talk about it. Like, what are the things we need to cover? This is what we did at the beginning of our surveillance. You know, there's a lot of sewer sheds in Missouri and we couldn't do every one of them. So we sat there like, okay, what do we need to cover? We need to get geographical coverage. We need to get socioeconomic coverage. We need to get we need to make sure we cover the places where there's vulnerable populations. And we talked about it and we got input from different groups and that's how we decided. And you'd have to do the same thing with that. Yeah, I just threw out the word sentinel. It's just, I was being, it's not cost effective to do a metagenomic sequence on every sewer shed in the United States. I'm just realizing that, but don't let the perfect be the enemy of an improvement.
So our approach using model-driven surveillance. So for example, you know, the highway work. So we start with transportation modeling and the trigger and transmissions model. And so we collect the sample along the highway, okay? And our plan is after analyzing all of that, we go back to refine the model, okay? And so it's like iterative process to get to the question that you asked, like where to samples.
Online question in here because there are quite a few. So Steve Rohde from MWRA asks that when we were all staying at home at the beginning of COVID, they saw changes in their incoming wastewater flows and quality. And he suspects that many urban sewer sheds have significant commuter impacts. That's because literally we were all staying at home, not going into Boston. Any thoughts on this in terms of mapping and responsive sampling? That's a question for anyone who wants to take it.
I think I'll jump in here. The transient population question, I think, has been plaguing many of us throughout this entire time. There is population mobility data that's available in the early part of the pandemic. I think, was it Google? Somebody was providing it for free. It was not straightforward or easy to understand and use. So I don't know how many people really took advantage of looking at the population flux into and out of the sewer shed. And plus, as you mentioned, a lot of people were staying at home. Now that data is not free. So anybody who wants to work to understand the transient population problem in terms of population mobility data in and out of the sewer shed is going to have to pay pretty big money to have access to that. But I think we, from a local perspective, like the people that the operators themselves oftentimes understand, and the local health departments too, they understand what's happening in their communities. So when you've got in North Carolina, I mean, I always go back to you guys as an example, sorry, but we have the mountains, we have the coast, and then we've got some major cities in between. So yeah, I think we oftentimes would struggle with interpreting our wastewater data because, there would be a major sporting event in Charlotte and we would see a spike in the wastewater. I believe when the Super Bowl happened, we noticed a spike in Nevada's wastewater. So I don't think the question's fully answered, but yeah, I think it should be.
Okay. Lauren Stowther, Rice University. This is a question for Marc. I guess it's two parts. First is, it looks like you're making a lot of progress to establishing this baseline using metagenomic sequencing. How do you envision how you will do kind of anomaly detection and or emerging threat detection using that data set? And then the second question is, how are you deciding, or what's the framework that you're using to translate this information to your health department partners? Because you're getting so much information on so many different viruses, and it's a lot, right? You have to prioritize that message. And so how are you, or what's the framework you're going to use to do that?
So this is research at this point where if I see anything, I share the information with the health department, but this isn't part of, there's no dashboard for what we're finding so far. So how do we choose? If seeing what's an anomaly is pretty straightforward. You just set up, you find an average and then you your curves and you say, what is weird in the last, is there anything that's unusually weird in the last month? And they sort of stand out. How to pick which ones are worth following. The numbers are large, but they're finite. It's in the hundreds, and it won't take that long to figure out, I think, which are relevant. You helped a lot because you helped show that most of those astroviruses really are probably just coming from kids. And once you know that, you can sort of check it off the box. And unless there's some kind of really weird astro that shows up, then at least know, okay, there might be a lot of diarrhea going on right now in the kids, but we don't necessarily need to put out a health alert about that. Did I answer your question? Not really.
I think you got at it.
Okay.
This question's for Marc, but probably anybody else could answer it. I was going to ask about how do you define sentinel sites, but I'll make this more as a comment, wanting to get some responses. First of all, I think it's great. Ask a lot of people what they want, health departments, your utilities, and so on. So is it better to have a broader sewer shed at wastewater treatment plant, or is it better to focus on, let's say, a hospital sewer shed, which is where the sickest people will wind up? You may not get early warning there for that site, but it might be early warning for from a national point of view. So larger sites versus smaller. Since you've consulted others, what did you conclude? Or are you in the experimental phase of let's compare the larger to the smaller?
I'm a large, and I get in trouble when I look at smaller sewer sheds, so I try to stick to the bigger ones when I can. I do think there is a need for testing in more single sites, but actually with hospitals and emergency rooms, I actually think air is a better approach, and faster turnaround is more important in those sites. It's different requirements for different groups, and when you start getting into hospitals, that's a little bit more health and a little bit less public health, but I didn't answer your question, but
And what is your turnaround time so far, at least, to get the metagenomic
oh, it's
data?
been slow so far because we've been piling up sequences and doing about a month. But it with the metagenomic we were talking about, the turnaround could be about a week.
Oh,
I just, one thing is thinking about it from a big picture and sustainability. I think that's, again, something we've talked about a lot today, is the sustainability of wastewater surveillance over many years and over time. And when looking at the bigger picture, the wastewater treatment facility, et cetera, I talked a little bit earlier that we work with them to join in with their compliance sampling. So I don't want to say there's a $0 personnel cost, but there is to the public health program, because we are working with them. We in return to them provide them with data and other things to benefit them. But my point is, like, at that bigger level, when you're talking about, we work with some of our research partners, our academic partners, on that facility level testing. So talking about going out to a manhole outside of a hospital. And when you think about that, the cost is really high. So I know there's two-part questions on which is better. It's which is better for the data, which is better for the public health action. But then the other question to me is which is better for the sustainability of this program overall. And I think that bigger is much more sustainable. We will, as long as we can maintain those relationships with wastewater treatment facilities, no matter how small our funding gets, but that's never going to be a burden to us funding wise. So we will always have those relationships and we will always have those samples. Whereas if we were doing it at a hospital level or a school level or otherwise, there's a much larger dollar cost to that, and you risk that sustainability factor over time. So again, not saying that the data and the usage isn't a key point, but the sustainability to me is a really key point on it as well.
We have one more question from online, and this is for you, Helen. Have you found anything from the highway septic sampling that is different from what is being found from sampling at the nearby wastewater treatment plants? And has this information been used to inform public or local health jurisdictions?
Yes. So in one case, in between February and March of 2022, we identify higher level of SARS coronavirus in the schools compared to nearby cities. So what we did in that case is we inform the schools that there's something going on in their schools. You may want to remind people about wearing masks and other things. So usually we don't, we just inform them and make recommendation what they need to do.
Hi, Jonathan Yoder from CDC. Thanks so much. This is a fantastic panel. And it strikes me that in order to get at this question about planning for responsive sampling, you really need to know how the universe works, right? It's populations, infrastructure, mobility, viral, abundance in the environment. And I guess I just wonder, when we talk about, we've talked about a couple frames here, and I would love to get your thoughts on which of the ones are most important. You just mentioned one, sustainability. We talked about representativeness, equity, early warning. There's probably a few others as well. Like, if you were to list your top 3 or 5, maybe I'll ask each of you, like, what are the 3 to 5 most important factors you think about when you're thinking about a responsive sampling strategy?
Want to go first? Okay. You hit the good ones, actually. I would like to see, it's got to be sustainable. It's not going to do anyone good if we do it hard for I mean, after the first SARS, I mean, we stopped funding it, and then no, it needs to be sustainable and maintained. It needs to be equitable. It needs to be as comprehensive as possible, I think, are my big 3.
Yeah, I would agree with the sustainability piece. And, I think rather than repeating, but just adding, for us, something that's really important with that is trust. So when we talk about responsive sampling or responsive testing, we also really consider the public trust, the trust of our wastewater treatment facility partners, the trust of our local health departments, and making sure when we're doing that, that we're also doing it in a thoughtful way. And, just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do it, is something, that I think we all think about in different aspects of public health. But, a trust piece is so important in that sustainability, and making sure that we are communicating what we're doing with these samples, and that we are, when we're thinking about responsive sampling or responsive testing, we're thinking about what we know about the interpretation of that and what type of impact that's going to have on our community, and keeping that in mind as well.
I would add feasibility, because something feasible for a big cities Department of Public Health may not be feasible for rural places.
And I just want to restate what I think maybe is obvious after hearing these three different answers is there isn't a perfect answer to that question. I think it's going to change based on, like, the answer is going to change based on who you ask, where they're located, and how wastewater surveillance is viewed in that location. So I think you've hit some really big ones, and I agree with what you're saying. But I'm just one person, and there's a whole room full of other opinions that maybe are going to differ from what you've just heard, as well as, each other's.
Thank you.
Just know we just got about 2 minutes left. So if this one is a quick question, otherwise.
Yeah, it's a quick comment, actually. Kirsten St. George, New York State Department of Health. I just wanted to comment on some of the challenges I think we face with correlating signals with location of source. So we have I don't want to identify the person, we have a senior staff member in the Department of Health who's commented a few times now that they live in one sewer shed zone. They work in a second sewer shed zone. They teach at a university in a third sewer shed zone, and they play golf in a fourth. And so, for example, Mark, I think the person you traced upstream, the restroom was in their work location. So despite the fact that they were secreting enormous titers of virus, they were actually well enough to be working. So they were moving around quite freely. And so had that been this person I'm referring to, they would have been creating a signal in potentially 4 different sheds. And had that been in New York, we would have interpreted that as we have people in 4 different areas with this cryptic lineage. So these are the kinds of challenges that we can face in correlating signals in wastewater with what's actually happening in the community. So I think we have to bear that in mind when we're looking at some of these signals. Your thoughts?
In the case where that happened, we knew it was from the same source because the lineage would change over time, and the exact same mutation would show up in both sewer sheds on the same day. But we're not always going to have that luxury. But I guess that these are odd enough that we've learned that they usually are from a single source, because if they were really to start spreading, you would start seeing them you wouldn't see them maintaining the same pattern week after week. They would start moving into new locations regularly.
Thank you.
All right, with that, we're at time. So thank you so much to our panelists. This was absolutely great. Thank you.